This is the book of Esther, starting with chapter 1 and verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. So it's let you know who it was in history. In the secular world, this guy is called Xerxes the First. At least that is the general consensus, that this is Xerxes the First. All right. As you can see, ruled from 485 BC to 465 BC. At least that's what's on this website. There may be disputes, but that's the general time frame. All right. And as it says right here, it says the Xerxes the First is one of the most popular kings in Persia of Persia in literature, appearing in the biblical book of Esther. All right, so that's the consensus, is that Xerxes the First is this Ahasuerus, and it makes sense because in Ezra 4 it mentioned that. In Ezra 4 and verse 6, and in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And that's kind of what we're going to get into, the accusations made against the Jews during these days, the days of Xerxes the First. At least that's the consensus. That's what a lot of people believe. This was Xerxes the First. All right. So without further ado, again, let's get in to it. Verse 2, and that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. That's 180 days. They were feasting big time, throwing a big party. All right. For a long time. Verse 5, and when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. They said, look, we're gonna step it up a notch. This is the after party for another week, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords and fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white, black and marble. Right. So, decked out with many decorations. All right. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one for another. So they each had special cups that were made out of gold, and royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. All right. So they didn't force them to do it. They wanted to do this. This was a party. For so the king had appointed all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to the king Ahasuerus. All right. So you have Xerxes and his wife. They both threw parties, and you have Xerxes entertaining all his male friends, and Vashti is entertaining all her female friends. Verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, after he got a little tipsy, got a little drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. Right. So he's like, man, my wife's so bad, you got to check her out, you got to see her. Right. And bring me my crown too. Right. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Right. So she's over here trying to show out for her female friend. She said, I ain't got to listen to him. I don't care if he's the king. I'm the queen. All right. And that pissed him off. Verse 13. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom, what shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, or according to law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains, right? So they said, what are we going to do with Vashti now? She's the queen, but she disobeyed the orders of the king. What can we do? All right. Verse 16, and Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. So they said, look, that ain't just disrespect to the king. If word gets out that we did nothing about this after she disrespected the king, it's going to cause an uproar and a rebellious spirit in all the women throughout the kingdom, which was from India to Ethiopia, right? The whole world at the time. All right. Let's see. Yeah, verse 17. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, that so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not, right? It'll set a bad example, a bad precedent. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath, right? So all the female friends that were there, they were like the wives of the princes and the noblemen that were there with the king, right? So it was like, look, if you let her get away with this, then our wives gonna start acting up too. All right. Verse 19, if it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. He said, look, the only way to resolve this is to get rid of her and replace her with someone else. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. They said, look, if you replace her for doing this thing, all the women will know to have their guard up, to not disrespect their husbands, because they will then put them away, right? They will then divorce them, separate from them, whatever you want to call it. Verse 21, and the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. All right, so this decree that men should rule in their own house, Xerxes said, look, I'm going to set the example that, this ain't going to fly. This ain't going to fly in my house. It should not fly in any of y'all's houses either. All right. So, let's see. Yeah. So before we get into Esther and Mordecai and how they play a role in this, I want to get in the Apocrypha. This is right here says additions to Esther, but really it is the lost chapters of Esther, essentially. All right. It's the rest of Esther. That's what the KJV actually calls it. All right. And I want to read chapter 11 here. I'm going to start with verse 2, because the verse 1 is just saying during the days of the Greeks is when they found this. All right. And in verse 2, this is the rest of Esther 11 and 2. In the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, in the first day of the month Nisan, this is Mardocheus, but it really means Mordecai, the son of Jairus, the son of Simeon, the son of Sisai of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. All right, and this Artaxerxes the Great is Xerxes the first. We've established that. Who was a Jew and dwelt in the city of Susa, which is Shushan, the palace, a great man, being a servitor in the king's court, right? So he was a servant of the king, all right? He was also one of the captives which Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, carried from Jerusalem with Jeconiah, king of Judea, and this was his dream. Behold, a noise of tumult with thunder and earthquakes and uproar in the land. And behold, two great dragons came forth ready to fight, and their cry was great. And at their cry, all nations were prepared to battle, that they might fight against the righteous people. And lo, a day of darkness and obscurity, tribulation and anguish, affliction and great uproar upon the earth. And the whole righteous nation was troubled, fearing their own evils, and were ready to perish. Then they cried unto God, and upon their cry, as it were from a little fountain, was made a great flood, even much water. The light and the sun rose up, and the lowly were exalted, and devoured the glorious. Now when Mordecai, who had seen this dream and what God had determined to do, was awake, he bare this dream in mind, and until night by all means was desirous to know it. Right? So Mordecai understood that this was from God, and it was talking about a certain judgment coming from God, but he didn't know the details. He couldn't quite comprehend what was going on here. All right. And we'll get to that later. We'll get back to that later. I just want a little setup right there. So we'll get back to that later. Esther 2, starting with verse 1. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Right, let's try to find her replacement, Vashti's replacement. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women. And let their things for purification be given them, right? Certain, that's something that women don't know about today, purification, right? You're supposed to go through a whole process of cleansing your body before you even get married. Women don't know nothing about that. Hell, they just give it up before marriage. And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. All right, so, gathered up all these women who wanted to be the queen. That's pretty much all the women in the whole kingdom. So they had to sift through, okay, which ones are even pretty enough to be queen rather, and then go through that whole process. Now in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. All right, so that would be like a Jamaican today, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. So Hadassah is her Hebrew name. All right. Esther was the name given to her by the Persians. It is the same as the word Easter. All right. It's the fertility goddess of Babylon. All right. That's what Esther is. All right. It goes back to the Babylonian Ishtar. All right. His uncle's daughter. Right. So Mordecai was the cousin of Hadassah, aka Esther, but he was a bit older and he was more like a father figure toward her. All right. For she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and her mother were dead, took for his own daughter. Right. So he basically raised her. Right. Verse 8. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Right. So this is like the first America's Next Top Model, for example. Right. Like a reality show, basically, except like this was like big time. This was for real. Right. So she made it to the next round, essentially, where she got she got pampered. She got pampered a bit. Verse 10, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. Right. So she was somebody who was like racially ambiguous. Right. They couldn't really tell what race she was just by looking at her. And she didn't reveal what race she was either, because Mordecai told her to keep it a secret. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Right. And nobody knew that she was related to Mordecai. Right. Because they knew Mordecai was a Jew, and they knew that he was like, a servant in the king's quarters. So it wasn't, odd for him to be around when all this process was going on. All right. Verse 12. Now, when every maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Again, see, women don't know nothing about that, about certain bath oils for months and months at a time, and then at a certain point you switch to some other ones just so you can have those scents and aromas about you. Women don't know nothing about that today. All right. Verse 13. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. Right, so they came in, presented her, and the king's like, oh, I really like that one, and then they would bring her around more and more when he requested her. Right. Verse 15. Actually, now that I think about it, this is more like The Bachelor. Right. That's what they do it today. That's all just just a little piece, just a little cheap imitation of what this was. Verse 15. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. All right, so this was years and years. This took to find this replacement for Vashti. All right, because all that happened in the 3rd year of his reign. So it was 4 years later before he even decided who he wanted to replace her. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. Right, so it was a celebration. Right, he's sending out gifts, people sending him gifts because he's getting married again. All right. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. Right, so she went through this whole process and never revealed her race. Right. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai like as when she was brought up with him. Right, so she listened to him like a father, essentially. Verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, right, doormen, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. Right, so they wanted to either overthrow or just jump him. They wanted to attack him. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. So she said, look, I heard from one of your servants, from Mordecai specifically, that they're planning something against you. All right. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Right. So they made a note of it. They made a record of it. All right. Let's just make sure this is still going, because it looks like the internet looking goofy. It appears to be okay. Where are we at? It still might be going. Okay, all praise to the Most High. Let's keep going. Chapter 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. And if you look into Agag was one of the kings of the Amalekites. Amalek is Jewish people today. All right, they are not the Jews, they're Amalek. And advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Right, so this Haman, he politically gained power during the days of Xerxes. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Right, so Mordecai did not care. He did not want to bow down to Haman, and there was certainly beef coming off the back of that. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandments? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew, right? So everybody knew that Mordecai was a Jew, right? But he didn't want to bow to Haman, all right? And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So that's from India to Ethiopia. So that would have wiped out, basically all the Jews. That's what Haman was trying to do. He was the first, a white supremacist trying to destroy all the, black people in this case. All right. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pure, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar, right? So they would, casting lots is similar to like rolling dice to figure out what you are going to do, decisions you're going to make. All right. Verse 8, and Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed. Brother, no, I'm doing a lesson. I ain't going to answer you, man. I'm not doing I'm doing a lesson, bro. I'm not going to answer. All right. There's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. So they're lying on the Jews, just trying to get them, persecuted. All right. And yeah, brother ain't even leave a comment on the video first. It must not be that important. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them, meaning to allow them to live. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it unto the king's treasuries. All right. So he said, I'll fund the operation. Right. So Haman said, look, I'm trying to wipe these people out. Please let me do this. Give me an order. Give me a decree. Give me some legislation where I can do this. All right. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Ammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. And see, remember how I said a few weeks back when we were going into the Medo-Persian Empire, they were easily influenced by the people around them. They were not the brightest bunch as far as, Cyrus himself did good things because he was influenced by Daniel in a righteous way. But then you had Ahasuerus or Xerxes come behind him and be influenced in a negative way. The same with the Artaxerxes that came after Xerxes. And it wasn't until Darius II that things turned around. All right. But verse 12, then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, and the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. All right, so the 13th day of the first month, keep that date in mind. All right, the first month would be like March, April time, springtime. All right. So when it says the 13th day of the first month, that would be like right before the Passover. All right. Probably around, maybe early April or like April, like the 1st of April. And the verse 13, and the letters that were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month. So they said, look, at the end of the year on the first day, or rather on the same day, the 13th day, all right, in the 12th month, by this time next year, essentially, we're going to have all the Jews wiped out. That's what that's the letters that they sent to every nation from India to Ethiopia. All right. 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Dar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey, like to steal all their goods, all right, all their possessions. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. So like take a whole year to prepare for how you're going to kill all the Jews that's in the region. That's essentially what these letters are saying. That's what Haman wanted to do. All right. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment. So Xerxes put his stamp on it. And the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. All right, so because the city Shushan was filled with Jews. So they're like, what? What's going on here? All right. Esther 4 and verse 1. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. Right. So when you see in the scriptures people rending their clothes, they rent their clothes, or they put on sackcloth and had ashes. That's a sign of mourning. That's how they would mourn. All right. So he went out crying in the streets and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And again, we saw that Mordecai doesn't really care about the king's commandment if it goes against his own morals and beliefs. All right. And again, like I said, it must not be that important. I know he's trying to blow my phone up right now. He knows. He tripping, man. Anyway, verse 4. So Esther's, actually, this is verse 3. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Certainly, right? You just found out that your whole race of people is going to be exterminated. Of course you would be mourning. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. All right, so of course Esther's kind of weeping in secret, right? Because nobody knows she's a Jew. But yeah, she's trying to tell Mordecai, look, put on some different clothes and all that kind of stuff. He's not hearing it. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlain, who had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hatak went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which is before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make requests before him for her people. Right? So Mordecai is saying, look, use your position and your power to not only reveal who you are, but to get this repealed. All right. Get this uphealed, I should say. And Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spake unto Hatak and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. So they're speaking through a messenger is the point here. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king unto the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days, right? So she said, look, if I just go in there unannounced and the king doesn't receive me, then I could be put to death, right? So she's afraid, even though she knows how much the king loves her, right? She's just afraid. She's afraid to use her position and her status to do something good for herself and her people. All right. They told Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. He said, look, don't think that you can rise above the status of your people. If this thing goes out and it is accomplished and they found out you're a Jew afterwards, they're going to kill you too. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So Mordecai is not even doubting that God will save them, because God always saves his people. He's saying, look, maybe you were put in this position for this reason, so that you could be the one to have a great name in the earth, how you deliver the people, right? Verse 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer: Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Right. So this is, she said, look, I'll fast for 3 days, fast with me. I'll get my maidens to fast, and we could fast and pray on this together. And then after that, I will go into the king. And if I die, I die. All right. So Esther chapter 5. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Right. So, some very vivid imagery going on here, but no, he received her, obviously, because that's his wife. Why would he want to kill her instead? All right. Yes, verse 3. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. Right. So he loved her so much. He said, look, I would give you half of my kingdom if you ask for it right now. What you need? And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. She said, look, I just want to cook you a meal. Bring Haman too. I just want to cook you this dinner that I got going on right now. I got my maids working on it. It's going to be real nice. All right. Verse 5. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So he's like, hey, tell Haman to hurry up and get over here so we can go to this dinner that my wife cooked for me. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Right. So even Xerxes might have been like easily manipulated by people, but he was not stupid. Right. So he knew she's cooking me this dinner because she wants something. What do you want? All right. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Right? She said, look, just come to my dinner tomorrow. That's all I want. And then I'll tell you. All right. Come to my dinner tomorrow that I got prepared for you. All right. Verse 9. Then went Haman forth that day joyful, and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai, right? So he still got this beef with Mordecai. Even though he just ate a good dinner and he's happy, he's seen Mordecai and his face turned because he got that evil eye towards Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Right. So he's bragging about this new promotion that he got. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself. And tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. And he's like, look, and on top of my promotion, I'm the only one that got to come to the queen and the king's feast. It was just me, the queen, and the king, and we were there all together. Verse 13, yet all this availeth me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Oh man. He said, look, but I seen Mordecai that Jew, and it just ruined my day. Verse 14, then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high. That's very tall. That's like 75 foot. That's very tall. And tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. So they told him, look, ask the king if you can hang Mordecai 75 feet high. All right. Then go down and merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Right. So Haman knows there's a dinner tomorrow night as well. All his friends and his wife told him, look, ask this request of the king while you're at that banquet. All right. Let's see how that banquet goes. Chapter 6. This is even before the banquet. Esther chapter 6 on verse 1. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. Right. So the king had already forgot what Mordecai had done for him, right? So one night he couldn't sleep, so he went into the records, started reading about, his adventures and things like that, and found that Mordecai had saved him, all right? And the king said, what honor and dignity had been done to Mordecai for this? And he said, did I ever do anything? Did I ever thank Mordecai for this? Did I ever give him anything for this? Give him a reward? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. They said, no, you never do nothing for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Right. So he went there before the banquet, was going to ask him about killing Mordecai. Right. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So he's like, which one of my servants is out there? Oh, it's Haman. Bring him on in. Verse 6. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than myself? Right. That's the pride. That is in Haman's heart. All right. So the king is just asking him generally, like, okay, what should be done to a man that I want to honor, right? I trust you, Haman. You're one of my trusted advisors. What should I do to the man that I want to honor and I want to thank? All right. Verse 7, and Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king used to wear, right? So the king's old robes, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. So Haman's like, that man should get a parade. That man should wear the king's old robes and ride the king's horse. Let the people know how honorable this man is. Verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth in the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. He said, bet. Hey, go find Mordecai and go hook him up with all that you talked about, and don't leave nothing out. Verse 11, then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Right. So, he said that with like teeth clenched. He said, thus shall the thing be done unto the man who the king delighteth to honor. He did this with, oh man, he did not want to do this at all, but the king forced him to do it. So he had to do it. All right. Had to swallow his pride in this moment. Got humbled. Verse 12, and Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning and having his head covered. Right. So now he's crying and whining that he had to do this. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise man and Zeresh, his wife, unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. Right. So now his wife is dogging him now. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Right. So he can't skip the banquet because he's one of the invited guests. All right. Esther 7, starting with verse 1. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said unto Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. All right. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Right? So she's like, look, I just want to spare my life and the life of my people. All right. There we go. Verse 4. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Right. So she said, look, we're being sold to be destroyed. If we were just sold as slaves, I could deal with that. All right. Even though nobody can steal me from you, O great king. Verse 5. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? So the king said, who is it? Tell me who's trying to kill my wife, and I'm going to get them right now. All right. Verse 6. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. And you know, she's like pointing at him. And if it was like a movie or a TV show, it'd be like, dun, dun, dun. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. So Haman's like, what? I didn't do nothing. He probably had a mouthful of food, you know. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Right. So the king got so mad that he had to walk out of the room. Right. And while this is going on, Haman's like, please tell him, please tell him to save me. I know he's going to try to kill me. Please. All right. So he's begging Esther now. Verse 8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. So he followed her all the way to the room and he crawled on her bed like, please tell the king to stop, please. He's gonna come against me now. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So as Haman is on the bed of the queen, like begging, the king walks in the room. He said, what, are you trying to rape my wife now? And as soon as he said that, his head got covered. Like take him to the executioner. Get him now. All right. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So those same gallows that he made to hang Mordecai, They were already built. He already built them for Mordecai. So they were like, look, we got some fresh new gallows, ain't been used yet. Well, let's hang him on that. All right. Verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Right. So that calmed him down when they killed that wicked and evil Haman. That's what calmed him down. All right. So here's Esther chapter 8 and verse 1. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. Right. So they just made that part of the royal property at that point. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. Right. So that's when Esther revealed, obviously during the whole speech and the banquet, at the second banquet, she revealed who she was. But then afterwards, after they killed Haman, she's like, oh yeah, Mordecai's my cousin. He raised me. He basically raised me. All right. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Right. So, so he promoted Mordecai instead of Haman right there. Verse 3. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Right. So she said, look, killing Haman ain't enough. You have to stop this decree so that people won't try to exterminate the Jews on, the 13th day of the 12th month. All right. Verse 4. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, if it please the king, and if I found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Ammedatha the Agagite, which wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Right. So she's, saying, look, how how can I not try to save my people in this moment? How can I live if all the rest of my people are destroyed? All right, all my family's gone. Verse 7. Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. So he said, look, write up legislation, do whatever you got to do, and here's my ring. You can seal it and make it official. All right. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. Okay, I just read that. Verse 9. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies, and rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. Right? So they made it official, sent it everywhere. And this is only like 2 months. 2 months and 10 days since Haman first sent out his decree, and the Lord already overturned it. Verse 10. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. Wherein the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Right? So, of course, with that first decree that went out, you would still have people who hated the Israelites would still try to do something to them in that day that was appointed. But the king just made it official that, you know, they couldn't do that, and the Jews could do anything that they needed to protect themselves in that manner. All right. Verse 12. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. Right, so that decree goes out, then all these things could be reversed. That all the laws that Haman tried to put into effect were to be reversed. Verse 15. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. So a lot of people started keeping God's laws as well. A lot of the heathens started keeping God's laws as well, because they knew that's how they would gain favor of the Jews. All right. So Esther 9 is when the feast day is made official. So we'll go ahead and read that. Esther 9:1. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them, the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, and Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aradai, Bajazatha, The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Ammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they. But on the spoil laid they not their hand. So they didn't take all their possessions. They just made sure that those people who were trying to kill them, they made sure those people were dead. All right. Essentially self-defense, if you really think about it. Verse 11, on that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. Right. So they understood, or rather the king understood how many people died because of their how they wanted to kill the Jews. Verse 12, and the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. He said, look, is that all? I can do a lot more. Is that all you need me to do? Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do. Tomorrow also, according unto the king's decree. Excuse me. To do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. But the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand. Right, so they weren't worried about their possessions. Right, they were just trying to make sure all the people who wanted them dead, that they the ones who actually died. All right, so but yeah, the 10 sons of Haman were hanged up with Haman, just to show an example of this is what happens to people who come against God's people. All right. Verse 16, but the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives and had rest from their enemies and slew of their foes 70 and 5,000. But they laid not their hands on the prey. Again, they weren't concerned with the possessions. It wasn't even that lets you know, since they didn't take the spoils, that lets you know that this was not an act of war. Really, this was an act of self-defense. Verse 17, on the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So you see how the 13th day is also connected, and we'll see how the 14th day and the 15th are connected as well. But verse 18, but the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Right, so they threw a feast. They had a feast on the 15th day. All right, therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. Right, so sending gifts. All right, verse 20. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly. Right, so we see that Purim is officially the 14th day and the 15th day of the 12th month. All right, that's where we are now. We are about to be back closer to spring. We're in the 12th month. We're still at the end of winter, essentially. All right, but this is the 14th day of the month Adar, of the 12th month. All right, tomorrow will be the next day of Purim, tomorrow night going on into Friday morning. Verse 22, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another and gifts to the poor. Right, so turn it into a day of gladness, a day of celebration. All right, and later on, the 13th day of the same month, the 12th month, becomes established in the book of Maccabees as the day of the destruction of Nicanor. And there's a whole other story about that. We'll get into that when we get into the history of the Greeks. I just thought it was important to cover this, not only because Purim falls in the middle of the week this year, but also because we are also talking about the times of the Persians and the Medes, essentially. All right, that's what we've been talking about for the past few weeks in Bible History 101. So I'll finish this out, and I just want to touch something else after this. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Ammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head. Right. So this is the summary of all this, essentially, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore, they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation. So that doesn't mean, we stopped at Christ and we started keeping Christmas. No, it's every generation. All right. Every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. All right, so keep these days in remembrance. And the whole point of the story is that God will always deliver his people when they are going through trying times. All right, he has proved it countless times that he always delivers those who call upon him. All right, verse 29. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim, and he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim and their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their crying. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book, right? The chronicles of the kings of Persia. Esther made it official because she was the queen of Persia at that time. All right, so the last thing I want to touch on is chapter 10. It's pretty short here, but even in the rest of Esther, it's not that long. Esther 10, and starting with verse 1, and the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? All right, so that book that he was reading whenever he couldn't sleep, that same book, they wrote it in that same book. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. So this is only 3 verses, and you look at that like, why is that its own chapter, right? It's only 3 verses. When you go to the rest of Esther, it continues. All right, in the rest of Esther chapter 10, it starts with verse 4. All right, then Mordecai said, God hath done these things. For I remember a dream which I saw concerning these matters, and nothing thereof hath failed. See, that's why we started with the dream. All right, because it was foretelling all of this. A little fountain became a river, and there was light and the sun and much water. This river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. And the 2 dragons are and Haman. And the nations were those that were assembled to destroy the name of the Jews. And my nation is this Israel, which cried unto God and were saved. For the Lord had saved his people, and the Lord had delivered us from all those evils, and God hath wrought signs and great wonders, which have not been done among the Gentiles. So he's saying no other nation can say that God has saved them time and time again like he has saved us. All right. Therefore hath he made 2 lots, one for the people of God and another for all the Gentiles. Right. So that's why it's 2 days of Purim. All right. And these 2 lots came at the hour and time and day of judgment before God among all nations. So God remembered his people and justified his inheritance. Therefore those days shall be unto them in the month of Adar, the 14th and 15th day of the same month, with an assembly and joy and with gladness before God, according to the generations forever among his people. So all praises to the Most High for that thing, for Purim, because it was all about delivering the deliverance of God's people.